It's tough. It is hard right now, but I'm completely optimistic and believe that the work that we are doing right now is the answer and the solution.
Welcome to Bitch Talk. I'm your host, Erin.
And I'm co-host Ange, aka Captain Party.
And for more than 11 years, the show has celebrated underrepresented voices in pop culture and beyond.
But not in the snore kind of way, which is why our listeners and followers have graciously voted us Best of the Bay, Best Podcast on 48 Hills for 3 years in a row. Three-peat, bitches.
If you like what you hear, follow us on Instagram and check out our website, Bitch Talk Podcast, and rate us wherever you listen to podcasts.
We're begging you to judge us. When does that ever happen? Oh, you're not going to say anything?
Oh, what'd I say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, on that note, on with the show. Clink.
All right, Bitch Talk, we're at Tribeca 2025. This is crazy. Can't believe it's like mid-year already. We're so excited to speak with the director of How I Learned to Die, Manya Glassman. Thank you so much for being on Bitch Talk.
Hi, Erin. Thank you, Angela and Aaron, for having me. I love your podcast. I listened to a few episodes before.
Uh-oh.
Oh, well.
We're always afraid. We're like, which one did this person listen to?
We get in moods sometimes, so yeah.
Yeah.
You have great banter back and forth. Love it.
Oh.
Thank you.
All right, interview over. That was great.
That was great.
No notes.
Manya, can you, since our audience hasn't seen your film, can you tell us what How I Learned to Die is all about?
Absolutely. How I Learned to Die is a 20-minute proof of concept short about Iris, a 16-year-old girl who finds out she has a 60% chance of dying in 4 days. So although it sounds a little intense, it's a comedy. And so basically in the course of the 4 days, she starts to compile things she wants to do. Since she's 16, a lot of them are like, get drunk, first kiss, drive without a license, sort of like shenanigans. And then over the course of the story, she starts to, be faced with not only her own mortality, but seeing how the mortality of herself is affected by the larger community she's in. I don't want to give too much away.
Yes, we definitely don't want to give too much away, but it is a really heartwarming short film. I really loved it. And I wanted to talk about how you crafted this character of Iris, played by the lovely Lola Darling. She's incredible because she's kind of an old soul while still being really youthful. Who thinks that Unchained Melody is the go-to romantic song? My mom does, but like, I just love the little eccentricities in the character of Iris. So how did you craft that character?
Mm-hmm. I appreciate this question. No one's asked me that before. And also no one has ever brought up the Unchained Melody, which I find funny because that, and I haven't said this, but like that happened to me at my first kiss. I put that song on. Yeah. My best, I mean, I can touch on that a little, like I'll talk about that a little and then go into it. But that portion is true. When I was that age, I had one really good friend, and we were just such romantics. And like, I remember watching Ghost with my friend Sarah, and we were like, this is the epitome of love and like drama and sex and like, oh my gosh, and I'm sure that's really relatable of like teenage girls just heart throbbing over this like 13-year-old boy, the kind of thing. So that was true on my end. My first kiss, I was like, wait 1 second, and then put that song on. And actually in real life, he ended up ghosting me for the rest of the summer.
Oh
yeah. So anyway.
On brand. Okay.
The movie's called Ghost.
Exactly,
That's just so crazy. All right.
So true. Yeah. I never put that irony together, but anyway, crafting Iris, a lot of it's a great question. A lot of it was based off of myself at that age. And I would say that I'm a bit of an old soul. Like my grandparents helped raise me, and then also just going through something that involves life or death kind of gives you a different perspective at a young age. However, although I was originally writing it, based on my own experience, when I started to cast and ran into Lola Darling, she had something that I did not write it into my script at the time. And it was actually a little bit more serious, my script. And then when I auditioned Lola, she was so funny. Like everything she did was so funny. And she would make jokes in the same way that reminds me of me. I feel like I would make, and I'm sorry if I'm like calling you out, Lola, right now. Like it's a type of thing where someone makes a joke and maybe no one hears it, but then one person in the corner of the room is like, I heard you and that was hilarious. Like that's the type of person Lola is. And I also really relate to that. And so after I auditioned Lola, I went back and I rewrote a bunch of the stuff because she had this sort of quirkiness to her that I was like, oh, I actually realized that I think I need this in the film, because for such a serious plot, so much of my own experience was through comedy. And so I was like, I have to cast someone who's funny. So yeah, that's how it was crafted. It was a bit of my own experience. And then also once Lola was the main character, I changed it to be how she is.
No, Lola, she's superb casting.
It's her first film.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, not her last, right?
Yeah.
And you found her, so
Finder's fee, yes.
yeah, for forever.
Yeah.
So this sounds like, and I don't know how much you want to talk about, a very personal story. Can you dig in a little bit more to that? And also, on the flip side of that, filming in hospitals, that must be a real bitch. I have to say that out loud.
Yeah. So I'm happy you think it was really filmed in the hospital. um, it so for the personal experience, I'm completely okay talking about it. And it was interesting even when making it, it didn't occur to me like, oh wow, I'm gonna have to talk about this personally so much. And I, in some ways, am thankful for making this film, because half of the time I'm like, I actually really wish I could talk about it more.
Mm.
And like when something happens to you and it's such a big part of your life, I feel a lot of the times people kind of like hide it under the rug, or when having interactions with people might feel like, okay, there's this huge portion. It's like, how do you say this? And if I do say it, then they'll really know who I am. I don't know if that's a relatable thing, but I feel like it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so making this film has been a good opportunity for me to like connect with people in my own life, of them saying, oh, I had no idea this was going on. And it's like, yeah, and it happened, and to this day, like this is how I see my life, and that's a huge part of me. So what happened was, when I was a freshman in high school, the doctors found out that I had a benign tumor inside of my third vertebra, and it was basically pushing on my spine. And so it was life-threatening. And not only was the condition life-threatening, but it was like what to do about it. And it was a really tricky placement. So doctors didn't want to just like go right in there, because it's near arteries, it's at the very top. If something goes wrong, either fully paralyzed, death, a lot of factors went into deciding what to do. Ultimately, I ended up having multiple procedures, but they didn't work. And so we had to do a surgery that was sort of in the film, it's referred to the Plan Z surgery, which was life-threatening. And so this was all happening while simultaneously I was a new student at a new high school. Mm. And so within like 2 months of being acquainted to like the popular girls, like the theater geeks, the jocks, like that whole sort of high school cafeteria crowd, within 2 months I was in a neck brace. And so that was, social suicide. I mean, just to say it like bluntly, but that aspect is the comedy aspect for sure. And like having that sort of a serious issue while also really caring what people thought about me, and like still wanting to, you know, kiss boys and like experience parties and stuff like that. Like that was all still very much the same. And so that's kind of like the heart of my film.
Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, thank you so much. I cannot imagine that is the hardest time to go through anything that makes you any sort of stand out
Yep.
at all when you're just trying to fit in. I can't imagine. But what a beautiful piece of art that has been created from this. And I appreciate you sharing that with us because so many people are going to watch this and be able to relate and see themselves in this character. But I also like how you touch on the people around you and what they're going through as well, and how different people express their grief and their fears. And it always comes across as just some form of miscommunication, even when you're meaning well.
Absolutely. That is a huge part. And I think it's hard to really remember at the time how much I was aware of it and how much versus how much now I'm aware of it. But I do believe there's a line in the film where the friend says sometimes it's harder to watch someone go through something than the person going through it. And I feel like that's like the crux of, I mean, that's my point of view. I believe that. I think it's really hard to watch someone go through something with no control. And I think sometimes I feel fortunate that I was the one going through it, because when you're going through it, you're just thinking about, you're so in the present, you know? And like when you're faced with death, it's like, that's it. But if you're someone on the outside, you have no control, you have no idea how that person's feeling. And you have to stay super strong for them as well. And then if they die, you're stuck here, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so especially at a young age, like I think of my parents, they, in real life, they were just so on top of everything, you know? And that must be exhausting, completely exhausting. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
the person that's playing your mom in sitting in the doctor's office taking the notes, like that hits home for me, and I would guess Ange probably hits
Mm-hmm.
home for her too. We both had parents that went through things. My dad had cancer, and it was just like you need at least two other sets of ears to hear what the doctor's saying.
To
So
hear
I'm
all of it. Yeah.
all, yeah, and I appreciate you having that moment and that scene. Um, but before we do wrap, which is so sad because there's a lot of questions and we don't have to. I don't know if Ange has more, and I don't want to cut her off. Um, the whole Spike Lee thing. I just saw him at Cannes. Do we say Cannes or Cannes? I don't even know. He's your EP. Come on, Manya. How did this happen?
um, it, I'm very lucky. He's a teacher at NYU. He's tenured teacher. And when COVID was sort of coming to the end and people were coming back together, he went back to NYU, and I basically reached out and was like, I want to be his assistant if he needs an assistant, if he has an assistant. And the supervisor, Patty, who I love, was like, well, there's a formal application, blah, 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 you know? And so I said, okay. And then I did it. And then I got an interview, and then I got the job. And so
Look
I
at you. Get it.
thank you. Thank you. And so was his teaching assistant at NYU for 4 consecutive semesters for 2 years.
Wow, that
Mm.
is incredible. Wow. Okay.
Priceless. It's
Yeah.
priceless.
It is priceless. I remember there's like a few moments in your life where you know that everything's going to change. And like when I
Mm,
got that job and kept it, I
yeah.
was like, you know, and I just learned so much from him. And he, you know, he's at NYU for like 12 hours a day on, you know, once a week, every week, and he will not miss it. I mean, days that I don't feel like going in, he's there, and so I'm there, you know. So anyway, I started working for him, and then towards the end of my last year at NYU, so he does office hours for students, and I would show him my script. And it was a feature at the time, and he was like, you should make this into a short so that then you can show people and it will help, inspire confidence in me. And so I was like, whatever you say, and went and made it.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, start from scratch. All right, let's go. Yeah. And I made it 20-minute or 20-page script, and he liked it. He gave me some money through a production grant, and I went and I made it, and then I showed it to him, and then he liked it, and he said, I'll be executive producer. And
sorry,
that's that. And I've been happy every day since.
If only you could tell that girl in the neck brace freshman year
Yeah.
that one day this is where it would lead, right? It's really special. I love that story. Well, okay, so we do have to go, but I do want to ask you, because this film has inspired me to continue adding to my bucket list. So what do you have on your bucket list?
Well, I know next on my bucket list is to make a full-length feature film of this. So, I mean, on a sentimental note, it's often like I'm still lucky to have both my parents. And so I feel that people maybe don't think like this, but I would love, like, for a week to just go somewhere with my parents at one point, while they're still here, while I'm still here. And I think as you get older, especially because my bucket list was like wild back then, I've done it all. No,
have you?
As you get older, it's like you realize the important things, and those should still be on your bucket list, because like one moment you can't put it there anymore. And so, yeah.
Well, before we cry, I'm gonna wrap. We're out of here, Manya. God damn it. No, the film is How I Learned to Die. It's at Tribeca 2025. Manya Glassman, screenwriter, director. Spike Lee's fourth semester assistant. God, I can't wait to see what you do next. I can't wait to see this feature. Thank you for making this film.
Thank you. Thank you both for having me and all that you've said to the world through your podcast.
We'll see you in New York. We'll be there soon.
Awesome. All right.
All right. We are at Tribeca 2025. We are excited to talk to these two filmmakers about the short doc Freeman Vines. And I'm going to have them introduce themselves since we have two here. I'm going to start with Tim.
Okay. My name is Tim Kirkman, and I co-directed the short Freeman Vines.
And hey, I'm Andre Robert Lee, and I am that co-director on the other half of Tim's universe.
And Andre, I'll start with you. Can you tell our audience what Freeman Vines is about, since they haven't seen it?
Yeah, Freeman Vines is about this gentleman who was chasing a sound his entire life. He heard a sound at a young age, and it really affected him. And he could not afford to buy a guitar, so he ended up learning how to make guitars. And he spent his life as an atelier. I forgot that word right. And he spent his life creating guitars and making them with the whole idea of, if I can't buy the sound, I can make the sound, I can find the sound, I'm in the hunt for it. And we met him down in the South in Fountain, North Carolina. And it was really intense because some of the guitars he made were created from trees that were used to lynch people. And I always say, I held one of the guitars in my hand and it just vibrated as I held it. So our film was about a moment in time with this artist exploring and looking for a sound that affected him deeply and a life he lived as a result of that individual moment.
Yeah, I'm interested to know how the both of you got in contact with Freeman, and if he was hesitant to be on camera, or did he even understand how important and beautiful his life story is or was?
The project came across my desk through a producer named Gil Holland. Gil's made over, I think, 125. He's produced over 125 films, I think, shorts, features, across genre. He's driven entirely by great stories. And Music Maker Foundation a nonprofit that supports musicians in the South, in particular, in the areas of blues, gospel, folk, and other kind of roots-oriented music. Um, they were the ones who really introduced us to Freeman. They made a book about Freeman's sculptures and these guitars a few years ago. They reached out to Gil Holland and said, unfortunately, Mr. Vines is ill. He was suffering from multiple myeloma, and the doctors gave him just a few months to live. And so Tim Duffy, who leads Music Maker Foundation, called Gil and said, do you have any filmmakers who might be interested in telling this story? Because we don't think he's going to be with us much longer. And I grew up in North Carolina, and I grew up not far at all from, I mean, I spent summers with my grandmother in the eastern North Carolina, and Gil, who was also from North Carolina, knew that the story would be meaningful to me just as a somebody who grew up rural and who's an artist and who appreciates art. And I knew I didn't want to do this alone. And I reached out to Andre because he's a brilliant filmmaker and a friend, and also someone who I'd met back when we were both working at Miramax. I don't want to say how many decades ago now, but we had reconnected a few years ago through a writing group, and I just thought this is a good. I've always wanted to collaborate, and this is the. It just felt like the most perfect project to collaborate on. You can take the part about the rest. Was he hesitant, I guess? I'd love your.
Yeah, it's funny, and I'm thinking back to the word I was trying to get is luthier. The man made his instruments, which was just incredible. And he wasn't resistant at all. And I think this is a strength to like Tim's invitation to me to come work on the project. When I first met Freeman Vines, I had an instant connection with him that I couldn't understand. I don't think he understood. And, he had this really great Southern way of talking where he just used, as Zora Hurston gives the word, a lot of portmanteau. He's making up the words as he went along. And he looked at me once, he goes, wait a minute, hold on, brother. So you're in charge of this project? I said, well, yeah, I'm one of the people running it with him. And he was like, John Brown, that's a beautiful, just like went off on how powerful it was to him to see me coming and doing the project. Many folks had done projects on him, which are all great. Ours was a very different experience. We were not being anthropological. We were not studying some folk artist. We were looking at an artist and allowing him to share his story and experience with us. So he was like very open. We couldn't get rid of him. He would follow us around his little wheelchair. What's happening there? What's happening next? Because he was so into the whole project. So he was very open to working with us, and really, I mean, it was only 2 days of us filming, and when we left, we were like, "Wow, that was an intense month, huh?" 'Cause that's how it felt.
Wow.
And also, he's kind of. I mean, I don't know, Andre. He's a performer.
Oh, totally.
He actually, I think part of the musicianship that he brought to it, as well as the artistic prowess, really, he was on,
Yeah.
and he was so sick when we met with him. He had just had chemo, and he was really, and we almost canceled it because he had just had chemo, and he said, no, please bring them. And so the reason that we went down was because he insisted. So I think it was the opposite of being reticent about being on camera. He was great. He was so open.
I have a note here just talking about capturing history and art and storytelling. And, we're in a time where there's some powers that be that want to change the course of what has happened in history and actually don't want to talk about what's happened in our history. And so I think this kind of storytelling and this kind of film is more important than ever. So I want you both to talk about kind of the macro level of what you're trying to say with this film and what you want people to take away from it, and what audiences do you want to see this film? I'll start with Andre.
I was just thinking about this and storytelling in our history and all that's happening in the world right now. And I do a lot of traveling through the South. And I talked to a lot of people who were there during the civil rights movement. And some of the messages are like, you know what, it's bad, but it was worse. And you must continue to fight on. And the message I have with that, yes, we may get tired. Go take a nap and come back when you're rested because we need you in this battle, which I really see as a war. So that said, taking part in this story, I just feel there's so much of our history that we don't really know and understand that's been kept from us that actually is available. We have to do some digging. I'm a bit of an egghead, so I'm reading a book right now, rereading a book about Frederick Douglass by David Blight. And I came across like at the beginning, and I didn't know this. Frederick Douglass organized and raised the money to build the Lincoln Memorial.
Hmm.
Like that's like a moment in our history that's kind of huge.
Hmm.
And I was reading, and I was like, why don't I know this? Why don't I know that he was a man like running through the country doing Reconstruction, trying to rebuild and raise money and say, we got to do this. And it's a tiny note, but it's a huge moment. So bringing this all the way back to Freeman Vines, this man lived in a community where he talked about the KKK just being a normal thing. I remember he once said to me, oh, well, if you want your kids to play in a local soccer league, you got to be in the KKK. That's the kind of state that I live in right now. And I was like, dang, that's like huge. So, all that said, this man that could have potentially been forgotten, could have just disappeared into history. We were lucky enough to meet people who already were concerned about preserving the history and telling that story. And we were lucky enough to come inside and take part in that. And so, every time I see the power regime or the empire falling or failing, however you want to describe it, I think what are the ways that I can step forward and keep pushing and fighting to make sure these stories are preserved and told? Because it's tough, it is hard right now, but I'm completely optimistic and believe that the work that we are doing right now is the answer and the solution.
Thank you so much for that answer. Completely agree on the topic of preserving history and making sure that stories never die. I heard you have a beautiful Spotify playlist that our listeners can download and follow if you want this music to live on. So if you could talk about the Spotify playlist. And I was also curious, will these guitars be in part of a museum or preserved in some way? Because I would love to see them up close and personal myself.
Music Maker Foundation has made great efforts to preserve all of the guitars and to make sure that they are continuing to be seen. And that makes me think of, I wanted to add something to what you were saying, Andre, which is that one of the things that I came away with from having the good fortune to make this project was to learn the value and the importance of identifying an artist not as outside. He's not an outsider artist. He's a fine artist. And I didn't really understand the differences. And we don't really get into that in the film too much. But Zoe Van Buren, who's the North Carolina folklorist, explained it to me explained it to us in such simple terms, which is that, there's a difference between someone who is a craftsperson who is making something en masse, which the South has a rich history of crafts. Beautiful, not saying anything against that, but that the entire body of this work is conceptual, and it comes from a place of narrative and of experience and an idea. And so I feel like what I learned so much and so deeply through this project was that Freeman's value as an artist is maybe I hope we are helping to at least acknowledge that and then teach people like me who didn't know the difference really. And that was just the coolest thing. The Spotify playlist is the soundtrack. Are you talking about the score?
Yes.
Oh, the score. It was so beautiful. It was written by a composer named Gresham Cash. And he's so fantastic, and he's deeply connected to the music of the South. Weirdly, he lives in Paris right now, or interestingly, he lives in Paris. But
Can we join him? I'm sorry.
I know. Let's all go.
The south of Europe is Paris.
Yeah.
One of the things, yeah, exactly. One of the things that I think, Andre, one of the things we talked about, and jump in because my memory may be a little bit messing this up, but what I remember is that when we were talking about score, one of the things we didn't want to do was to make the audience feel like the guitars, that the sound had been found, that it was driven by this search, and that the search continues. And so I think I just like the way he captured that. So there was deliberately no obvious signal that these were the guitars being played, something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's beautiful. There's nothing to do except amplify that message. We had a really great team of people involved in this project. And, just now listening to Tim, I'm so grateful that I was brought in to take part and get to meet Freeman and try and tell this story. And everyone involved was just so moved by this man. When you watch the first 3 minutes, you're like, who is this guy? And you're falling in love with him because he is a performer. He is so warm. And to think about him just in like being in deep pain, physical pain, almost at death's door when he talked to us and never hesitating to be involved is a moment of like, this is an artist who understands that his legacy needs to be shared. And he just opened his heart to us, which is so great.
And speaking of the music, there's one more thing that his sister sings to him in the film, sings this
Yes.
great old gospel hymn, actually. And I find myself weirdly, like, I am not religious at all anymore. And I find myself singing that song at least 2 or 3 times a week to myself. It is so catchy. So I love the
I
music.
know that, Tim. That's awesome. That's so great.
Oh, well, I really love this film. It really spoke to my soul, and I hope it gets seen beyond Tribeca, the film's Freeman Vines. We were speaking with the co-directors, Andre Robert Lee and Tim Kirkman. Thank you so much for being on Bitch Talk. Thank you for telling the story.
Thank you for helping us amplify the story.
Yeah, thank you for having us, and thank you for the work that you're doing. Your work is important, and we are glad to be a part of it. So, Yahoo.
Thanks for joining us on today's show. You can find more information about this episode in our show notes.
If you're missing us, you can visit us at bitchtalkpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter and buy us a cup of coffee.
Did you know we're also on the radio? You can find us at bff.fm.
And lastly, rate and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. All the cool bitches are doing it.
This podcast is a proud member of the BFF.FM podcast network. Learn more at podcasts.bff.fm.
BFF.FM, best frequencies forever.